All right, guys, archery elk season is upon us. At this point in the game, we have got to distill all the tips, the strategies, the tactics down to the stuff that actually works. So I'm going to reflect on 5 massive mistakes that I have seen hunters make over the years. And this is based on over a decade of guiding every September for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And we're talking about hunts on heavily pressured wilderness areas, remote Forest Service stuff, areas where the elk get the crap hunted out of them. So I'm going to reflect on observations from my personal guiding, but also watching dozens of guides that have worked for me and watching hundreds of drop camp hunters I've taken into different wilderness areas. It's not about what you do, it's about taking advantage of every opportunity, not screwing up the opportunities you get. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. All right, guys, so I wanted to mention that I'm having these custom skinning knives made. These are called Cliff Skinner. I've got a whole bunch of reasons why I've had this knife made the way that it's made. I've got a short video on the website. The details are there. Pursuitwithcliff.com. Click in the corner up by shop. You'll see Cliff Skinner. Click that puppy. You'll get all the details. All right, so let's talk about mistake number 1. I vividly remember, and I'm going to just use a story to depict this by analogy. I vividly remember the best game of poker I ever played against my brothers. We're pretty competitive in this regard. We're sitting in this Alaska fishing lodge in Sitka. Myself and my brother Ty, my middle brother, we are whipping the crap out of our older brother Wes. Wes has come into the lodge and he is wearing these ridiculous shades, right? These big dark shades with, of course, the cliche idea that he is somehow hiding his intentions, right? We're not gonna be able to read his bluffs because of these sunglasses he's wearing. But little does he know that in the lighting of this lodge, me and my brother can look at him and we can read his hand by the reflection in these ridiculous sunglasses. So I tell this story because this is exactly how a bunch of people hunt elk out there. They think they're being sneaky. They think they've got all the cards in their hand and they're gonna fool the elk, but the tactics they use and the things that they do, it's not really tactics, more just, the actions they take, they're giving all the information to the elk, right? This is particularly the case when it comes to vocalization. So the first thing let's talk about is locate bugling. So your locate bugling, and really we'll just throw in there locate cow calling, right? You're roaming around the woods and you're cow calling every once in a while, just hoping to hear an elk vocalization return, right? This isn't a bad strategy by any means. It does work. The bad component, or where this can go bad, is that you locate bugle and you get a response. Don't continue to locate bugle. That bull has given you some information. He's shown some of his cards. He's shown some of his intentions. The last thing you want to do is start pitching information back to that bull. What a lot of people don't realize is when elk hear you, they basically see with their ears. They know exactly where you're at. So you've already given them that. Maybe they've only slightly heard that locate bugle or that locate cow call, whatever. If you're lucky, they might just know the general area you're at, but they probably already know exactly where you're at. The last thing you want to do now is locate them again, right? Do another vocalization, because now they're going to know for sure exactly where you're at. And then if you've moved, which is even worse, if you move, 100 yards towards okay, I'm going to start moving to get closer and make a play on this elk. If now you call and locate them, they're going to not only know exactly where you're at, but it's very likely they're going to know how you're moving across the landscape. So you've already basically thrown your cards out in front of this bull and shown them what you have, right? So that's the first mistake a lot of guys make. I talk about this a whole lot. You can go, there's a great podcast I did with Evan Koster. I'll stick that video up right here. He talks about this concept a lot. You want to get really close before you start to vocalize again when you're locating elk this way. And an extension of this is if you're not locating elk that way. Let's say you're locating elk by glassing, right? This is the way that I would find a lot of elk in heavily pressured areas like the flat tops, right? They don't vocalize that much. There's a whole nother discussion to be had on this, why that's the case. I personally think it just has a lot to do with elk density, but the fact is they don't vocalize a whole lot. So a lot of times you're locating them by just glassing them from great glassing locations. Again, you've glassed up elk, right? In this case, it's awesome to extend the poker analogy because you have information and the elk have no information, right? That bull has no information because you've picked him up via glassing. This is actually even more ideal because he does not know where you're at. He does not know how you're moving towards him. So the worst thing you can do if you glass up elk during September is to be like, oh, there's a bull, and then get your bugle out and see if he'll bugle from 500 yards away, from 1,000 yards away. That's the worst because now you've just thrown information at the elk that you didn't need to. What you want to do is use what you've gained. You know where the elk is. You potentially know where he's moving. You're watching him and his cows. You want to get in there and set up as close as possible before you locate them again and get into that setup. Like I said before, go listen to that video I did with Evan. We get into the depth of this and the weeds on this. But again, the same deal. Keep your cards close hold and get in there and try to get as much information about that elk before you give up your location and your intentions. The last part of this one is going to be somewhat controversial, I guess, and to me it's absurd that it is. But a lot of guys will say, oh, when I'm approaching elk, I don't care if I'm super noisy until I'm really close to them. I personally disagree with this. I think this is bad hunting practice for sure. A lot of guys will say, oh, I don't care, you know, I've called, I've bugled to them, now I'm being loud and cracking branches as I approach because I want them to think I'm an elk. Again, just to extend the analogy, guys, yeah, okay, they think you're an elk, but they know where you're at now. So you got to remember, get into the brain of a bull elk, right? Yeah, you've bugled and now he knows where you're at, and you're a bull, right? Approaching him, he's potentially has cows. That's not necessarily always a good thing from his perspective. It means he might need to, you know, move and maneuver just to get ready for a fight. He might want to move away with his cows just to, you know, avoid any conflict for whatever reason, right? There's all sorts of things that bull has going through his mind now because, yeah, he hears you going through the woods, cracking branches. Sure, maybe you're lucky he thinks you're an elk, which even that's kind of debatable. I mean, let's be honest, guys. I can listen when I'm in the mountains, and if somebody's approaching on horses, I can tell that they're on horses versus if they're hiking in. I can tell, just me as a human, and I'm not tuned in like an elk. Let's assume that the elk does think that you're an elk moving through the woods. Why would you give him that information? Because even if that's the case, now he's going to do some things accordingly. And the biggest part of this is, regardless of what his strategy is, maybe he's gonna, you know, he hears you going through the woods and he's like, all right, the next time that bull calls, I'm gonna go over there and get in a fight with him. Works great for an archer, right? Well, yeah, to some extent, other than the fact that regardless of the situation or what the bull's thinking, he knows exactly where you're at. So he can approach you however he wants. He can try to get wind on you before he even approaches you. He can try to get wind on you 200 yards out, all of those sort of things. Wouldn't you be better off trying to maneuver through the woods as quiet as possible and avoid him hearing you? Sure, if a branch cracks, you know, you've given up your location. Not a positive by any means, not the end of the world either. But if you can be silent and get in there as close as possible before doing those setups, again, you're not giving the bull the information that is valuable to him and negative to you. I guess the last thing I'll say on this, and it's kind of related and kind of unrelated, is just don't be impatient, right? Once you get in there, I guess there's two parts, right? When you're setting up on elk in September. One, don't be impatient about getting close enough. You know, you're trying to get in close. You're trying to get in with 100 yards, within, 75 yards ideally, to set up for that final, archery setup, the kill setup. And it's hard to do that. Sometimes you have to be really patient. There's cows moving around. Maybe there's satellite bulls moving around. Be patient so you can move in and get close. Don't set up at 200 yards and hope for the best. That's just a form of you giving up early on the setup. You really want to focus on getting within that distance. So don't set up early if you can avoid it. The other part of that is if you do get in there close, you start vocalizing with the elk, you think the bull's coming in, and then you don't hear anything for 20 or 30 minutes. Don't be impatient. Wait another 20 or 30 minutes. A lot of times I've been guilty of this myself. Just last year, I was guiding a hunter. I didn't hear the bull for probably 20 minutes. I got up, and it wasn't the bull I was calling at, but there was another pretty darn good satellite bull literally 50 yards away coming in pretty quiet. That bull could have came in and gave that hunter a shot. My bad. It was just pure impatience. So not quite this point, but in the same category. Just think about that when you're out there. All right, so one exception to this concept that I want to talk about is when there's a trade-off between speed and maneuverability and giving the elk information. Obviously, if you need to move fast, we all know that yes, we can watch elk. They're walking through, they're walking along a ridge line casually, but the minute we try to catch up to them or cut them off, we're basically at like a jog to be equivalent to their walk. If that's the case, you need to get somewhere and you need to get somewhere to do the proper calling setup, then yeah, there's a trade-off there. You're not going to be quiet in order to just get the speed that you need to get over there. In that case, yes, don't worry about the fact that you're giving them a little information if you're loud. I totally get that. There's going to be environments and situations where that makes sense. So that is one aside. But in general, guys, don't let them know where you're at until that final kill setup that I always talk about. All right, so the second big mistake that people make is they get really stuck in their logistics into a tight spot before they need to. I've spoke about this a bunch in different videos. I actually talked about it in the video with Cade a whole bunch. I'll stick that video up right here. And throughout this video, guys, I'm gonna reference a bunch of other videos just because it's where I go in more in depth into each individual concept. But Cade and I talk about, and I talked about it with Evan also, you don't wanna get stuck in an area and get infatuated with an area until you know there are elk there. This is a mistake that a lot of people make. And I notice that guys with a lot of experience will make it because they want to hunt in a historical area that they've found elk in the past, just based on their hunting history. And that is always a good place to start, but you want to not get infatuated with one location. So the key you've got to figure out, and this is for sure applies to heavily pressured areas where the elk are just, low density and the habitat is high density. There's way more habitat for elk than there are elk. San Juans, flat tops, most of the wildernesses in Colorado are going to apply on this in September. You've got to focus on big picture logistics. So the number one thing that I talk about is get up somewhere high. Even if you're camped down in the top bowl of a basin and you feel like you can see a lot, climb the extra 1,000 feet in the dark in the morning, or come back after light, after shooting light at night, so you can be at that spot, that higher spot in the prime times, and you can locate elk. And you might have to spend 2, 3, 4 days of your hunt just doing that. If there's not a lot of vocalizations around, there's not a good road system where you can effectively get around and locate bugle or locate call. And just so you guys know, a lot of people using locate bugles to find elk, even in areas where they get the crap hunted out of them. You have to realize that a lot of those folks are doing it where they can effectively get around and call in a lot of different locations. So in some ways, they're doing the same thing that getting up high and glassing is doing, right? They're not walking around one single drainage and bugling, locate bugling and you're just spending all day there or multiple days in that one little area trying to locate a bull. They're covering a bunch of ground. A lot of guys are on logging roads, 2 tracks all over, BLM, that sort of thing that holds elk, and they're locate calling that way. It's the same exact analogy. You have to have a strategy that covers a bunch of ground so you can find where the elk are and then start hunting them. A lot of guys I've seen plagued by this. Not everybody, sometimes you just have shitty luck, but a lot of the guys that go out and hunt Colorado for 9, 10 days, they don't see an elk. A lot of times they'll say, all I saw was old sign, the elk were there, but now the sign was old. It doesn't matter. You need to keep moving and have a broader logistical strategy before you get into the weeds. Don't stay in one spot just hoping elk show up in September. It's not likely that they will. In some areas where they get hunted a bunch, sure, they're going to ping pong around and you're in a historical spot. You might get lucky that way, but a much more effective strategy is to keep broad. On your locate calling and your glassing, you're gonna be way better off. I do very few endorsement deals and I do no paid reviews because it would affect the type of content, quality of the knowledge I could put out. So an important part of my business model is my membership group. I'll stick a link right here where you can sign up. There's paid and free options. I do a weekly live stream there. There is a thriving community of folks that are helping everybody become a better outdoorsman. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or if you're an expert, there's something there for you. Go join, guys. It helps me out a ton. It's the way to support this content and to support me. I'll see you there. All right, so the third mistake, and this is generally not a mistake when you're in the game, it's more of last minute prep mistake, right? We're a couple weeks out, maybe 3 weeks out from elk season, and a lot of people all of a sudden get infatuated with calling. That's one of the worst things, or I shouldn't say one of the worst things, because obviously getting better at sounding like an elk, it does help in the broad scheme. There's marginal value to that. It's more of a misallocation of thought process and preparation, because elk for sure make all sorts of different tones and sounds, and each elk is an individual. Actually, in my podcast with Bob Terwilliger, he says, and I'll stick that up right here, another video for you. I love the quote that he said in there. He said, some of the worst elk calls I've ever heard were real elk up in the mountains. And that is true. So when you're getting prepared here, you only got a couple weeks. Just try to get the basic sounds down. I've got a couple videos on the channel. I'll stick one up right here that I think is very hard to argue with. All you need to do is listen to some vocalizations of real elk and then mimic them, right? And you'll get the sounds down, particularly cow sounds. Yes, go out there and do a little research on the alarm bark and that kind of whoop that bulls make, so you can avoid making those and you can know what that indicates when you're in the field. But outside of that, at this point in the game, don't dedicate 3 weeks of your time to trying to sound perfectly like some guy on a video on YouTube. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Just get some basic cow calls down and then don't worry about it, because what you really need to worry about on calling is the setup component of it. That's way more important than the actual sounds. And so on this front, I recommend you go do a little research. Chris Rowe has a great concept called he basically calls it like the bedroom concept or the doorway concept. How elk approach a calling setup and how you need to be set up where when they get to a certain point and they need to see a cow, you're ready to shoot them. That's a concept that you need to understand and is low-hanging fruit for archery hunters. The other thing that you should really look into is you should just read about bull elk's biology and his strategy when he's approaching a situation, a calling setup, be it live elk or you as an archer, and he's maybe a little bit worried for whatever reason. The bull is depending on his instincts, so he might use wind. He's for sure going to use slope if he can. He's going to approach from the top if he thinks a bull's down there with cows and he might have to fight him. All else held equal, he wants to approach from the top. He doesn't want to approach from the bottom. I've seen bulls fighting hard in intense terrain, and almost always the bull on the bottom gets the crap beat out of him. So a lot of times they're going to want to approach from the top. In general, bulls don't like to bang their antlers on trees, brush, whatever, so they're going to approach a certain way because of that. Use that stuff in your setups and research it now instead of getting into sitting and calling for 5 hours straight. Learn how to make a basic bugle, some basic cow sounds, and then study calling setups. You're going to be way better off if you do that. That's the stuff that actually kills bulls. All right, so the fourth big one that I'm going to talk about is quitting, and you can do some prep on this front. I've got, again, a whole video, I'll stick it up right here, on how to avoid quitting on these hunts. The reality is right now you're pumped up, you're going on a 6, 7, 10-day hunt up in the Colorado wilderness, you've got all your backpack gear set up, you're ready to rock. The thought of quitting the hunt is like a distant possibility. There's no way that's going to happen. The reality is, statistically, I can tell you half of you guys are going to quit early. And that is one of the biggest reasons why you're not going to kill elk. It only takes, a moment to kill a bull. It only takes one setup, one call-in setup to kill a bull. Doesn't matter where you're at. It can happen at any time. So quitting it destroys hunts because of that. Just mathematically, it cuts your probability of success down greatly. Guys don't think about it until after the fact they've quit, and they never think about it, beforehand because they're so pumped up. So a couple things you guys can do right now to prepare. One, think about how you're gonna get enough calories. I know this sounds super obvious, but I talk about it a bunch in that video. From my observations, getting into a calorie deficit or just getting your digestive system screwed up, and this leads into the second part of this I'll talk about, but those two things lead to quitting early for a lot of folks. So what I recommend is actually structuring your meals. Don't go buy crap on the way to Colorado, the way to Wyoming for your meals, right? And that includes Mountain House. Don't just pick it up on the way. Don't plan on just dropping by, a Cabela's or whatever and picking up a bunch of Mountain House. They may only have ones that you don't even like. So you need to plan ahead. Make sure you get the food that you like, the food that you're gonna eat. And the other thing is, I always have a snack pack every day, snack bag. That's the different things that I like, and usually they're very close to my current diet. So I tend to be usually on a high protein, high fat diet. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that a lot of calories that I intake in the woods are from that exact same diet. So I'll have these bags. I know how many calories are in there. Usually it's between 2,500 and 3,000 depending on the hunt. I'll put things in there like biltong, oysters. Sometimes I'll cheat a little bit and have some dates and jerky mixed in together. So I'll have that all in there, and it's stuff I know I like and it fits with my current diet. And that helps me stay on the path. One, just to not get my digestive tract screwed up because I'm changing everything. But the other part of it is it makes sure that I get the calories. I don't go to bed at night until that bag is empty. That's easy prep you can do to avoid calorie deficit. I don't even know the scientific facts. I honestly don't think anybody does know exactly why this is. All I know is that if somebody gets in a calorie deficit in a fairly short period of time, the chances of them quitting, crapping out are way, way higher. So make sure you cover that. The next one on this is family issues, wife issues, whatever, right? This is another big reason folks quit on these archery hunts. They get halfway through, they're homesick. They feel like they've got, something going at home that they need to get home for. And I'll throw business stuff in here too. Some of this is just manifested, right? You get where you want to quit, so you manifest some excuse. You're basically blaming it on your kids, wife, or business that you're quitting. You kind of got to man up on that front of it. But the other part of this is real. There can be reasons why you feel guilty. You've got, issues in business or whatever. Right now, you've got 2 or 3 weeks. If you're going mid-September, you've got a whole solid month. Get that stuff solidified. Make sure everybody knows you're going to be gone. There shouldn't be any animosity about you being gone. This is your time to be up in the woods. You've been planning it for, probably all year, if not multiple years. So get that all straight, because again, this is a source of people quitting. You got plenty of time to straighten it all out now. So make sure you take care of that. And I'll mention at this point, if you're hunting with a group of hunters, get everybody on the same page. I'll stick a video up right here on hunting partners. This is one of the biggest issues. If your buddy has business issues, domestic issues, whatever, the chances of it bleeding over to your hunt are very high. So make sure that they take care of that. Obviously, it's hard to motivate a buddy to take care of that. It's really none of your business. But if it's an issue and it's clear to you it's an issue, you can always suggest that they take this hunt off. And I know it sucks, guys, to lose a buddy because he's got too much shit going on with business and life or whatever. But it's better to avoid it now and get it taken care of rather than it affect your hunt in the mountains. There's all sorts of reasons why it does. A lot of times it's just logistics, right? You guys drive in the same vehicle, so when he leaves, you have to leave. Also, it can just be, psychological. Now your one buddy's leaving and, do you want to hunt solo? So there's a lot of reasons why you'd rather just deal with that right now. You're going to have way more success if you do. The last one I'll mention on this, and this is more of a practical thing on the quitting front, and that's altitude. So if you're going to one of these areas that's high altitude in September, and this tends to be when guys are pushing the altitude envelope for them personally, because elk are still in those upper bands of elevation in a lot of different areas. Think about altitude, and if you think, there's a possibility that it's gonna, be an issue for you, and just some broad indicators are, if you're not in the shape you wanted to be, and you're an older guy, and you live at low elevation, you're more likely to have altitude sickness issues. Couple recommendations I'll make. Again, got a whole video on it, go check it out. But general recommendations, go slow in terms of logistics to get to the mountain. So if you're driving from Florida to Colorado, don't drive straight, right? And get no sleep for 2 days. Even if you've got one buddy, spread it out a little bit, maybe even fly, figure out the logistics on that front where you can get decent sleep. You're gonna be much less prone to altitude sickness. If you can fit a day in to acclimate at elevation, do that, that'll help. And then on the actual hunt front, that first 24 hours are critical. Don't go out there and get super exhausted at altitude. Make sure you stay hydrated and make sure that you keep your calorie intake up. Don't eat giant meals if you're feeling shitty, but make sure you're eating something. The hydration component is huge. That stuff should help you on that front and avoid you quitting. That's a legitimate reason why people quit. If they're just feeling horrible because of altitude sickness, it's hard to fight that, but there's ways you can avoid it. All right, guys, so the fifth thing I want to talk about, and this one I think is just an issue with misinformation when it comes to archery. So I'll give you guys the facts right out of the bat. And this is based on my experience, talking to a lot of other guides and outfitters, talking to game wardens. At least 50% of bulls are not recovered after they're hit during archery season. At least 50%. In a lot of situations, it's probably only 30 or 40%. Something we don't talk about a lot, but in the context of this discussion, it matters because it is a huge variable in your success. And when I say success, I mean getting that bull recovered, taking it home. The guys that improve this part of their game, they are way more successful than the average archer out there. Just look at the statistics, right? This is an element of taking advantage of every opportunity. If you're just shooting at bulls when they come in ad hoc and you're missing them all the time, wounding them and not recovering them, you're not doing your job, and the end results are obviously not good. So this is something I want to focus on, and I think just knowing that helps a lot of guys. A lot of guys are out there archery hunting, and they think that, 95% of bulls that come into archery setups, within 40 yards end up in the back of somebody's truck. It's just not true. So you can improve this part of the game drastically. All right, so the first thing, and I'm getting annoying with this, but I'll stick a video up here on tracking. I cover some concepts that I like people to implement after the shot, right? Pretty basic stuff, just being quiet after the shot, listening for where that elk went, get really good data and log it in your brain. Take a picture from where you just shot. If you're hunting with a guide or a partner, ask them where they think the last spot the bull was when you shot, when you saw it, when you heard it, where it went, the direction. Collect all that information and get clarity on it before any celebration, before walking off to look for an arrow, any of that. Make sure you get very good information at the shot. And like I said, be quiet so you can continue to gather information. Elk, when they're hit, a lot of times, they're not quiet like they are when they're coming in. You can hear exactly where they go. You can hear them struggling. Sometimes I'll hear bulls struggling from 250 yards away. The heavy breathing, the crashing, the rolling with their antlers, that's really good information. There's a whole bunch of things you can do on that front in terms of practical stuff right at the shot. Go check out that video. I dive into it. Now, the other thing that I'll mention, and I have a unique perspective on this from guiding, most people want to shoot early on elk. And particularly if you've got the setup right. If you got the setup wrong and elk comes into the setup, not where you're expecting them, you might only have one shot. You might only have, a 15-foot frontal shot. You might only have that 30-yard, kind of quartering shot that's not ideal. And yes, the bull's going to roll. But if you get your setup where it makes sense, a lot of times, guys, if they just wait, the shot will improve. with distance, the bull will come closer. Even if they come in and they can see, you know, the branches are obscuring them from where you're at. They're not quite in an open spot. And they come in there, but you have a clear shot and they're kind of looking. A lot of times if you don't take that shot because it's not ideal, it's pushing distance for you, whatever, they'll actually come in closer, particularly if there's a little cover between, you know, the bull and the collar, and that'll work out. They'll get closer. The other thing is a lot of times they'll turn broadside, right? If they're not quite in, you know, that open archery setup that you've got going, they're not quite there, but you just wait, they'll turn out of that quartering position, they'll get broadside to you. It happens a lot of the time. And the reason I know that is because a lot of times I've been hunting with archers, they've been at draw, I've told them to drop their draw, and a lot of the times it improves much more often than people think. Don't push your shots is what I'm saying. Time and time again, I've seen guys that are like, I'm only gonna shoot 35 yards at a bull with this setup, my current marksmanship, whatever, right? And then a bull comes to 37, 45 yards, whatever, and they let one fly. Don't do that. There's always some chance, and a lot of times it's a very good chance, that the situation is going to improve. Keep that in your mind. A couple more practical things on this. If you're getting some reps and setups and you're having elk come in and you're constantly getting frontal shots, my recommendation is to really consider how you're setting up, or consider that you might be drawing too early. If the terrain's open, the bull sees you, so when you draw, the bull sees you and you can tell, so you're getting that frontal shot because all of a sudden he's aware and that's the only shot you get. Doesn't really matter who you are. I don't think you should be taking that frontal shot unless you're sub 15 yards. And if you're not really on top of it, you don't know exactly where it's at, you probably shouldn't even be taking the shot there. A lot of bulls are lost because of that shot. Sure, a lot of bulls drop dead from it too. So I'm not gonna pass judgment on it. That's just my thought statistically. But if you keep getting that shot, it's probably because of your setup. So consider changing your setup, or consider when you're drawing. The other thing I'll say on this is you've still got a couple weeks to do a little marksmanship practice on the archery front. I suggest you start doing some shooting from unique positions. You don't want to do a ton of this because it can mess up your form and it can, you know, be problematic in that way, but you for sure want to try some odd positions. When I say odd positions, I don't mean crazy stuff. If you don't think you would take a shot kneeling, then you don't need to practice it. But you do need to practice things like a turned body, right? You're not always gonna have that standard archery position. You know, the bull might, you know, swing really quick to the left. You've got to be able to turn your torso and take shots. You've got to be able to shoot at some, you know, sort of angle. You've got to practice that at least a few times, get some reps in so you're comfortable with that. Almost all shots out there in the field, they're going to be some variation of that. You guys that are shooting a bunch of 3D, you've got an advantage because you're putting yourself in those type of situations all the time. But if not, you're shooting in your backyard, you've got to make up those positions and figure out how you're going to do it. Shoot with your harness on, shoot with the layers on that you're going to have on, so you get used to that. Now's the time to do that. Yes, you don't want to do that all year long. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't want to, but right now you're getting closer to the season. Cover that stuff. Make sure you've done some of the different varied positions so you're confident in doing that when you're in the field. The very last thing I'll say on this, and this applies to archery and rifle, for some reason it's missed in the archery world. Again, I think it has to do with the fact that there's just misinformation out there when it comes to archery. A lot of people don't realize how important follow-up shots are. So if you shoot a bull in an archery setup and he runs another 20 or 30 yards and he stops and you look, you know, a lot of times they'll do that because they don't really know exactly what happened. Have another arrow knocked and shoot him again. If you get in on a bull that you're tracking, he's bedded down, gut shot or whatever, you're in there close enough to him and you can get a shot that you're confident you're gonna hit him. You don't even really need to be confident you're gonna hit him in. You just, if there's a chance you can get another arrow in him, do that. Shoot the bull until you're out of arrows or the bull is dead. That's a very important thing that I think is lost on archery. I think it has a little bit to do with the media around archery. A lot of times all that's shown is the first shot because there is, you know, lost bulls sometimes. There's a lot of tracking involved, all of those elements. Because of that, a lot of times the fact that, hey, let's do some follow-up shots rapidly, and that's an important component, kind of gets lost on archery, but don't let it get lost on you. If you can get another arrow in them, do that. All right, guys, so all 5 of these things, damn near guaranteed, if you implement them, you're gonna take advantage of all those opportunities, and that's the most important thing on these heavily pressured elk. So guys, I hope that was helpful. If it was, do me a huge favor, like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna send you off with this video on time management. It really relates to several of the concepts I talked about in this video. It'll tie in there good. Seems super basic, but for sure it'll add to your success also. Thanks guys, I'll catch you later.